Welcome everyone. Today is November 27th, and this is another installment of SIG Apps bi-weekly call. My name is Nati, and I'll be your host today. We have one single announcement. 129 release is on schedule. RC0 was released last week, and RC1, from what I was looking, is planned for tomorrow. I haven't seen any issues with that one. So it looks like 129 is in a good shape. If you will be ever reached by folks from the SIG release to help with fixing a particular flake or a blocker issue, make sure to help them resolve the issue promptly. So that is out of the way. We can jump to discussion. Michal has a topic about introducing support for managed by label in job controller. Take it away from here, Michal. Do you need to share the screen or anything?
Thank you. No, I don't think I need to share because I don't yet have any materials. Just want to get your opinion on the proposal that I have. So basically, maybe I want to introduce the new managed by label in job controller, and what it does, um, it basically says to the job controller that this job with this label should be skipped from synchronization or reconciliation by the job controller. And why to do so? And then the status, like the reconciliation, will happen by mirroring data from another cluster. So basically, the use case is a multi-cluster queue that we are working on. And in the multi-cluster queue, in the design, we have basically two types of clusters. We have the leader cluster that a user connects to and creates jobs. And there are worker clusters um, in which the jobs are actually computed. So one user journey is that the user comes to the leader, creates the job, but we don't want to run it on the leader. We want to mirror the job, so all the spec should be pretty much the same, or at least the diff should be as little as possible. Ideally, no difference. But maybe, let's say, the UIDs and stuff like that could differ. But essentially, it's ideally the same job. And then while the job executes on the worker cluster, its status is mirrored. So for this reason, we need to disable the job controller in the leader cluster, and yet we want the user. So from the user perspective, we want this whole multi-cluster queue to be transparent. So the user still can observe that the progress is being made without going directly to the worker clusters, but the user can observe just the progress just by watching the job in the leader cluster where the job was created by the user. So this is our sort of story. One possible solution, let's say, to the multi-cluster is to separate the roles of the leader and the worker and then disable completely the job controller at the leader cluster by a flag in the kube controller manager, but we don't want to do that because we want to be able to share the role of leader and worker so that the leader can also be a worker for a, let's say, subset of jobs. So some jobs still must be executable or runnable on the leader. So that's, I think, summarizes the story. And we went through a couple of ideas how to do that. But I think the simplest is just the manage by. And I could go through other, but maybe you already have some comments that I would like to hear, and maybe if you want to explore other options, then we can do this during the discussion. So I think I will end here and welcome some comments or questions.
Does anyone else have any question? Michał, you mentioned that you have a written proposal somewhere. Can you link that proposal in the agenda? I don't know whether
Uh,
that's an issue or a Google Doc or something like that.
I have a Google Doc, let's say internal for now,
Okay.
that I discussed within the team. Still need some work to share it, but ideally I would like to, let's say, if you think the idea makes sense, then I think I will just directly transform the doc into CAP.
I don't hear any additional questions from folks, but I'm curious,
Mhm.
why particularly having a mirror job, which would basically be sitting there just for the sake of transparency, let's call it that way.
Mhm.
Uh, why doing it this way and not, for example, introduce a third-party CRD, which would be the main, I don't know, wrapping or wrapper around the actual workers specification. That way you would have a little bit more control with regards to specifying which workers are handling which particular pieces of a job or something along more sophisticated rules for implementing how a particular job is handled in the multi-cluster scope. That will be my first question.
Okay,
Yeah, start
so
with that.
so so that's probably doable, what you suggest, and it's one of the options that was discussed internally so far. But think of the use case that it's like often user has one cluster and he is happy of using one cluster. Uh, so it has set up some in-house integrations with the cluster that create the job, observe, monitor the job, and let's say notify the end users about the status or the progress of the job. And all this happens just by monitoring the status of the job CRD. So we want now the user is hitting, let's say, some quota or stockouts on the cluster, so wants to add a new cluster. But ideally, the user only needs to add the cluster and modify the queue configuration. Doesn't need to, let's say, modify the in-house monitoring pipelines and everything. So this would be ideal that, let's say, this happens transparently. Of course, we will probably want to have, let's say, additional label or additional annotation that would indicate where it's which, let's say, worker does the actual synchronization of the job, is running the job for debuggability. But from the user, like end user perspective, he or she, the user wants to see the progress. And let's say we don't want to require users or developers of frameworks to need to adjust to the new CRD. So this would be my sort of response to this, like the main argument. Why not another CRD? But
Uh,
of course, this would work. Let's say we can create another CRD that will essentially return the results. But yeah, we want to avoid that so that there is a smooth transition from using one cluster. At the moment you start hitting capacity limits, you can add a new cluster or two new clusters, but the transition is smooth and doesn't require you to to modify all your in-house frameworks.
I assume that the synchronizing of the status of the main job would be the role of queue.
Yes.
Okay.
So there will be like a queue mirroring controller that does nothing else, that just observes the worker cluster job and then copies the status.
Uh, what were the other alternatives that you were considering
Okay, that's
when
so.
going through this? Because in all honesty, I'm looking at what we currently have with regards to all the resources in Cube, and I cannot think of an example which would be similar to this particular one approach. Um,
So.
the
Mhm.
Federation, there were two attempts to Federation, and in each of them, there was like a main job, and then there were copies created on the respective subclusters. Uh, and mirroring would be basically mirroring of the statuses would be happening in a similar fashion like you're describing. But as it stands today, I cannot imagine or I cannot think of any other resource which would do it in a similar fashion with regards to the um, having a phantom-like resource within one of the clusters just to be able to mirror them. Uh, Probably the closest that I can think of would be the endpoint slices, but
Mhm.
endpoint slices are a little bit different in that the endpoint is the entire thing with all the possible endpoints, and slices are only like a view on part of the endpoint to be able to work with the resource uh, in more performant way. But maybe I'm missing something.
Yes. So if I may, so indeed the endpoint and endpoint slice is like the inspiration for the managed by label, because in the endpoint and endpoint slices also the label with this name is used. And what it does, it says that the data in the endpoint slice are mirrored from the endpoint, let's say, but just part of the data. And this is slightly different use case. It's similar. I think it's similar enough to justify, but and it was similar to be inspiration, but here the mirroring is, let's say, within the cluster, right? And we want to mirror data from outside the cluster. But other than that, yes, it's just blind mirroring of data in between CRDs in case of endpoints, but for us it's mirroring job status. Other alternatives that were considered were so one was to introduce the spec field, let's say controller name by similarity to scheduler name. And this was proposed as a cap, but I think this one has, let's say, and this could also work, let's say, technically. And why not doing this is more of by saying that so the job spec and status um, um, they are not, let's say, designed to be like abstraction that is implemented by a different controller. They are not generic enough, and they were always done and developed with the needs of the Kubernetes job. And it's like very unlikely that we will have another controller that will exactly needs the same spec or status fields. because again, they are not like abstracted out to be generic. And this would also, let's say, encourage people to do forks of the controllers and never really put commits upstream. So we don't want really to say that this is the way to replace the job controller with another controller. But still, we want some ability to for like mirroring. So we don't want, let's say, to advertise this as a different controller name, etc. But just, let's say, like managed by maybe is even maybe too generic, maybe mirrored by or something like that. But we want at least at the declarative level say that it's just for mirroring, so that we don't encourage forking the controllers and yeah, just replacing to add small features. And we and the same as I said before, let's say this the API isn't abstracted out enough so that it can be used and will fit exactly another controller, let's say. It's just our use case is just, let's say, the mirroring of data. If this makes sense.
I'm looking at it, and it seems to me that this is the idea behind it is very similar to a certain degree to what the job set is doing, in a way that this is building another layer for managing various approaches to job. The way the current job resource is, it's just like you said, it is specifically for a particular cube cluster. The use case that you are currently describing is more about the ability to manage multi-cluster resources. Um, I'm worried that the additional label will not help, but only confuse some of the users, especially those that are not aware that a particular job is being run in a different cluster. Having a separate dedicated resource for this kind of operation gives you a clear boundary between, oh, this is the overarching job resource, whereas this is a particular thing that actually does whatever the job goal was. So I would personally lean towards a CRD, as I do recognize the issue with the multi-clusters, but at the same time, I would not want to embed multi-cluster primitives within the core resources in Cube as it stands today. It might be confusing to a lot of the users um, with that information, especially that some might already start asking because we already have the information about the controller ID as labels, and both the controller UID and the job name a particular pod is a part of, if I remember correctly. I was checking that before the call. So we already have that additional information, how these two connect with one another. So for a lot of the folks, the managed by would be like a repetition of something that we already have, only to express that, oh yeah, but this is actually not running. I'm convinced that having explicit boundaries would be definitely much more beneficial, even at the cost where you're moving from one cluster and you're expanding your current workload from this cluster to this group of clusters. Um, I think that you could actually provide you with the primitives to build on top of that by leaving the worker as is on the current machine and only adding the overarching resource as one of the upper clusters, the main clusters, the driver cluster, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, we call it leader usually.
Leader, yeah. Rather than having this kind of functionality embedded in the core resource. I don't see a benefit directly in the core cube where we could use that and build on top uh, within the platform itself when we're talking about a single cluster. I see the added benefit and for when you're working in a multi-cluster environment, but currently the way Cube is written, it is not a multi-cluster uh, enabled by default. So yeah, that's why I'm rather hesitant on adding stuff like that.
Yeah, this makes sense. Although, yeah, it does make sense, but still we considered that, and we think that the benefit to the end user. So there are currently many frameworks that observe the status of the job and in-house solutions. And it's not trivial. Let's say you have one cluster and you are happy of it, and then you want to migrate. So the idea is that you can do the upgrade from one cluster to add a new worker, but this will be transparent to all the in-house or open source solutions that you use. Otherwise, there might be like plenty solutions out there that just monitor the job. And
I
the idea is to make this transparent to the end user.
I I see your concerns, but at the same time, the ability to build on top of the Cube provided core primitives was at the core uh, of the API when it was created. So I'm not seeing that as a big problem that people are observing particular controllers in their own way. Yes, I do recognize the problems coming from that, and that's one of the caps that we're trying to push for quite a while now to be able to have a consistent way to read the information about a status from any kind of controller. Because as it currently stands, every controller has been written by a different person over the years, and their statuses do not match. So you always have to write uh, a controller that knows how to read whether deployment stateful set job or something else. Um, and that is definitely a problem and an issue. But I don't think that embedding multi-cluster primitives would help us with this particular case. I think that building this kind of solution outside of the core is a good path. Also, most importantly, that that doesn't the fact that we will build it outside of the core doesn't mean that it cannot be brought back if at some point in time we decide that, oh yes, this is very valuable and people can actually unify that. But I'm worried that the way people are already consuming jobs is not uniform and will most likely not be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I say, let's say the separate dedicated CRD is sort of a alternative. Uh, uh, I'm not sure now what to do. I was thinking about discussing this as an alternative in the cap, but still try to sell the managed by, because like in Cube, it will be very simple, right? We just skip the synchronization, so it's like small thing, but will enable us this whole use case of multi-cluster queue. And otherwise we will, yeah, but maybe it makes sense, let's say a different CRD provided by, let's say, remote job provided by Q. But again, this, I'm not sure how to transition. Let's say this will put the burden of the in-house on every customer who wants to transition at the moment of transitions from using single cluster to multi-cluster. And like, it's no longer, I don't know,
I,
at least
I,
we will need to seriously consider, because you submit the job, you observe the job, and now suddenly you want to just add a worker cluster, and then you need to look at a different place, right, to get the status from, let's say, remote job CRD, and this is like a big complication.
I yeah, go ahead, Philip.
Um, yeah, but you said like that we would like to, if we implement it with the different controller, we would try to hide this feature as much as we could, but like in theory, but we cannot be sure that some other controllers will not try to implement a different behavior for the job, and we could get incompatible behavior, and then it would affect all the other tools as well.
Yeah, because we disable job controller, so potentially users, yeah. So I was thinking just about documenting that this is meant for the use case of mirroring the data. Maybe mirrored from would be the idea. But yeah, in practice, we couldn't prevent that this happens. That's also a good point.
I have one more comment. Because the proposal of having a CRD, if there was just a job, then it might be possible. But if a user is using job and MPI job and multiple Kubeflow CRDs and all of this, so for each of them there will have to be a replacement CRD. So it is indeed a lot of burden for users. So yeah, if we could avoid some of it, that would be great. But
I recognize the burden, and I'm aware of the additional cost, but the other benefit is that you're actually are allowed to not to have some kind of a leader that will be responsible for only submitting a job and only mirroring, but actually opens it up to the point where you could mirror, you could basically transform the current job into a multi-cluster job, and the current state of the job is automatically pulled into the multi-cluster job immediately. I'm not sure how that will work in the original idea that you had, but that ability of creating the, I don't know, leader job or remote job or something like that, and then cross-referencing it through all the clusters or whichever cluster you care about actually opens up the possibilities. If I remember correctly from the batch working group updates from Marching, he was specifically talking about the ability to add additional to expand queue with the CLI. So I think that would be one of the potential use cases for Q, because currently Q does not have a nice user interface for presenting the information about how the queue looks like, where the how the flow of information is going inside of the queue. You have to manually look through jobs. So having a dedicated command, which would basically transform a currently running job into a remote job and then allowed it to additionally being executed in different clusters. I would definitely see that as an additional benefit of having some kind of like remote job CRD rather than having a mirror thing, because in that case you have to kill whatever you've done by now when deciding that, oh yeah, this will be my mirror, and this is my main cluster, and then I have to start all over again from scratch. So that would be another thing that I would think of when considering an option for whether core or a separate CRD, because when not having a leader cluster, you're basically opening up yourself for, oh yeah, I don't care where that resource lives, because we can copy that information across all the clusters, which simplifies the interaction for the user. The additional burden would be then covered by the Q CLI. And the mirroring controller would handle the additional work of making sure that all the information is properly propagated through all the clusters where a particular remote job is being executed.
For reference, we do have a CRD that reflects the status of the job in the queue. It's called workload. Yeah, it has where it's running, with what flavors, what the admission status, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't actually contain the status of the job itself. Just well, it's also a limitation of API calls and whatnot. So it's yeah, it's not ideal. But okay, I guess we'll have to go back to the drawing board based on the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have like ideal solution because there is a trade-off and both have some limitations. So currently when the user comes to the queue, he just creates jobs and then can monitor job and then report back to the end users. And we want this flow to be preserved. But indeed, we could use workload or something else. But then it creates burden on two levels. One is for the tools that create the jobs and observe their status and everything. They will need to adapt to use the new CRD. And there is also burden of all the frameworks, let's say MPI job, Ray job, everything that would need to use, let's say, produce results in this. And what we wanted to have is ideally, let's say, a simple solution that let's take mirrored by label. And if it's set, then skip. And then inject this logic into all the frameworks. And then the rest would be done by Q, let's say the mirroring. So that was the idea, which would be completely transparent from the users and only require support for this new label in the other types of jobs. And going with the new CRD, this, yeah, we will need to think what are the trade-offs. But I don't think, let's say, that we have a clear winner still about the approach.
Yeah, I
Because
hear you. I hear you. What I can definitely advise on is opening up this document and sharing it with both the batch and the SIG Apps mailing lists for additional feedback. And I would leave it off over there and try to figure out what other people's thoughts are with regards to both pros and cons of implementing each of the approaches.
Sounds very good to me. Do you think, let's say, for this purpose of discussion, a doc is better or just Skype directly?
I would start with the doc because you can directly leave comments in the doc to particular pieces. The cap is not strictly necessary for this one, especially if you go the route of adding in new CRD, and you will be able to contain the changes within the queue itself. It'll be just easier for you to work off of the Google Doc. The additional benefit of embedding the remote job inside of a queue is the fact that you will be able to move faster with releases and iterate on it, rather than if you decide to go with a core cube resource, which would obviously force you to go along the cube release timeline, which for any kind of research is usually taking significantly longer than it could.
Okay, this suggestion sounds good to me. So I will open a doc shared externally that summarizes, let's say, the approach we want to take, but also keep, let's say, the alternative section, and people can discuss. So this sounds good to me. As for the aspect of going fast with this approach, I don't think we are foreseeing any other changes required by the core Kubernetes. Because, like, in principle, again, we just want to mirror and disable the main. So I don't think we will need that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that's totally fine. Like I said, if we open it up as a CRD and have a discussion, and there will be reasons that will convince me to go one way or the other more strongly than we are currently, I'm open to reconsider. But as it currently stands, sorry, I have strong objections to let it land in the core. Okay, cool.
Okay. I didn't hear. What do you have?
I'm not in favor of having the mirroring
Okay.
be part of the core as it currently stands. I'm not convinced yet, but I'm not saying that I will not be in the upcoming future. So
Okay, great. We will.
That's the whole point.
This sounds very reasonable to me. We were also quite hesitant about the approach, but that's what we settled up on at this moment. But yeah, let's open the doc and discuss. I'm pretty sure there will be very many comments there. So thank you.
Do we have Adil on the call to talk about the second topic? Or anyone else? Okay, hearing none, I'll just move this over to the next time. And for now, we'll jump over to Javier. If I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, let me know, please.
Yeah.
Your topic was this particular issue. You want to talk through your use case?
Yeah. So basically, when specifying the specific, usually deployments, when you have replicas 1 and you have max search 1, for example, you're marking that when you patch that deployment, a new replica should be basically getting set and then deleting the old one, right? That's the way in which it's designed so that we can avoid downtimes when deploying new apps. The idea is that the controller should aim to have one replica, but when it's doing a change, it can go up to one more extra. However, this is something that is not maintained when draining nodes. So basically, when draining nodes, what happens is that the replicas that there are there will be, well, the node, for example, first will be cordoned and then drained. But when it's drained, instead of creating the replica first, what we do is basically rely on the self-healing that the controller implements, rather than knowing that we're going to basically kill all the deployments and do something about it. All the pods of that the deployments in that node, I mean. I'm not sure if this gives enough context, but this is basically like very important, mainly when there are deployments or replica sets in general that have a single instance. So it's not, when you have many instances, like, I don't know, a web server or something like that, I haven't found it as troublesome. But when there are stuff like, I don't know, webhooks or something that is about like the control plane or whatever, then it starts to get more and more difficult to control. When, for example, you have very small amount of traffic, or rather that traffic can be served with a single pod, for example, an Nginx controller, having a single replica would be enough. However, because node drains happen, for example, in UK every day almost, then what happens is that you have a downtime in your app for like 20 seconds, what it takes to basically boot up and heal. So I'm trying to see if we could maybe modify the current controller so that the life cycle of the node is taken into account, like once it's starting to get drained, instead of killing the pods directly, the max search parameter is used to basically schedule a new one before killing the previous one.
Yeah, Philip, I was about to call you in for your cap about node maintenance. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I have this cap, which is called declarative node maintenance, which is discussing a number of similar issues like this one. And we had a couple of discussions already, and we have like suggested some solutions, but the cap is still in work in progress, and there will be quite heavy changes before we decide the final result. But I think, like, so for first we are trying to take it more slower and start with simple changes to kube, and then like later we will consider these other cases which are making problems, for example, during the node drain. So I suppose it can be like these conversations can be part of the cap. So you can take a look if you want.
Okay, so this is something that you're already tackling, or?
Yes, I linked both the cap and I have the cap opened on the screen. but I also
Oh, yeah.
linked it in
I see.
the chat. I'll make sure that it is
Yes.
also linked in the agenda after the call.
Mhm.
So for your particular use case, I don't think we want to specifically change how the controllers are working because that's not a problem with how the controllers are working. Here, the problem is the fact that you only have a single instance
Mhm.
um, of your controller, so it's hard for a controller to be able to do anything. Because in the case of draining the nodes, it's actually you either have to have a PDB, which then during draining node is being consulted and you can react accordingly, or within the actual draining node logic, we would have to have information about, oh yeah, you need to look at this and that. And this is
Hmm.
what Phillips Cap is talking about the ability to expand a little bit longer on the draining node functionality to be
Hmm.
able to consult the drain to also different resources. I can't remember how it was defined there.
Yeah, just in case, having the PDB set currently will basically make it undrainable.
Yes,
So
I recognize because with one instance you basically you are reaching the maximums
exactly.
for your particular application. An alternative approach, I'm guessing that currently you did mention somewhere in the issue that you're basically doing this manually. An alternative approach would be to have like a two replicas
Yeah, that's
application
what I'm doing right now,
where
actually.
one
So
of
I
them
have,
is, yeah, one of them is basically in standby mode or some kind of like leader election. And then only if the first one, the main one, dies, you basically are able to quickly recover and make sure that they are running on separate nodes, ensure that basically the node draining use case is fulfilled. And then
yeah.
the PDBs, you have a PDB with a single instance that ensures that yes, there will be always the app. And the only delay in that case is um, for the follower to figure out uh, how quickly it should pick up the work. So this is the only delay, which I'm guessing is probably in the order of seconds.
Well, yeah, the main problem is that having two replicas for every single thing. So for example, let's encrypt Nginx, like you start to add quite a lot of instances, of bots that are doing literally nothing, because there is no requirement for them to be up really, but to avoid that intermittent node draining issue. I do believe that there is some responsibility, not sure in which controller, but to basically know that, because there is already a language, right? There for like Mac search, like that's designed to know how many extra instances it's allowed the system to take while it's doing its operations. That's the way I interpret the keyword. So I think we could take advantage of that, and maybe not sure if it should be on the node draining controller, like in the one that is doing the draining part, or who. But I would say that somewhere around there, something like that would need to happen.
Have a look at the proposal. See if that one helps solving. I'll also link the proposal in the issue that you opened,
Hmm.
and then we can
Okay.
probably try to figure out how to approach this from there.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
Does anyone have any last minute stuff that people want to discuss? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much all for today and see you next time in that case. Bye
See
all.
you guys. Bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye.